It's The Least Famous Ryan with Ryan Reed and Bailey Pless. Our guest today is director, producer, and writer Walt Perez. He's the founder and CEO of Verloren Productions, and he's received several honors for his work. His most recent live-action short was qualified for consideration at the 96th Academy Awards. He came by and dropped a lot of knowledge on us about breaking into the industry, which is great because we're all trying to kick in the door. 4-4 is optional. Enjoy!
The window's open, so
should we close it for sound or no?
I mean, it might be fun if we're in the middle of talking and some crazy starts screaming shit down there. I don't know.
Alright.
So do you?
Do you let people in?
So the Walter, he's the guest.
Yeah, you leave it open.
Alright, fine. Well, hello, what's up, guys? My name is Ryan, and this is
Bailey.
And we're here with
Walt Perez.
And this is the Least Famous Ryan. How you guys doing today? Even though you guys can't technically respond, but I hope you're doing well.
Least famous Ryan?
The Least Famous Ryan.
They could tell you how they're doing in the comments.
Yeah.
That could work.
Tell us how you're doing in the comments.
I mean, we do kind of need people to comment on our videos. It's like good for something.
Just comment little fire emojis, because that means like, it's hot, it's fire.
Yeah.
And put like the little heart eyes too. And put like in parentheses
Ryan needs the validation of your hard eyes, people. He needs validation real bad.
Please
Look
comment,
at his face.
Comment.
We both need validation. It's okay. Do you need validation?
I'm okay.
Really?
I'm at that age in life where it's like, I used to when I was like little. You try to find validation to either a parental figure. I need them to like me. And then your friends, stuff like that. But there came a point in time in life, I think, when I hit my third decade, where I was like, you know what? Do I really need it? Even with film, like, I put the work out there, and if you like it, great. If you don't, I'm not looking. Mm-hmm. I like constructive criticism. I love it. It's like, tell me, what am I doing wrong? But when it's just got awful, like, oh, this movie sucks or this is trash, I'm like, well, why is it trash? Like, tell me. Like, Letterboxd is funny because their comments are like just hilarious. I'm like, who wrote this? Instead of a critic who's like, I don't like it because of X, Y, and Z reasons. I mean, I'm not against it's, freedom of speech, say what you will, kind of thing.
I mean, no one likes an internet troll.
Yeah, like, even with stuff like this where, people are like, oh, just talking mad trash, like, oh, shoot. And so, yeah, like, I mean, I'm 37 now, so I was like, I just feel like, validation is important, sure, but I don't go looking out for it. It's like, if you like me, great. If you don't, whatever. Dude,
I don't think I'll ever have that kind of confidence.
I mean, I am the youngest of 5, so definitely I needed that attention. I still need that attention.
Oh, he still needs the attention. It's why.
But definitely I am working on getting my way towards how you are right now.
I mean, it's not easy. Like, I've had this conversation with different people, like artists, filmmakers, actors, who are like, man, like, they just, like, I need it. Like, someone's like, what's my name? Like, I need to hear my name. Like, I need to see myself somewhere. If not, I'm nothing. I'm nobody. And you're like, whoa, like, for example, I remember in my culture, there was a famous, he's passed on, there was a very famous soccer player from Argentina who was just, he called himself God. He thought he was God. And everybody knew his name. Everybody chanted his name wherever he went. And so one time they put him to the test and they took him somewhere where no one knew who he was. And he was going baloney because he was like, and I quote, he's like, I'm going to kill myself unless someone says my name right now.
Oh my gosh.
You're like, wow. And, but that's in like, you imagine that because he's world champion, high-end class, you're like, oh, shoot, people should know who he is. But in some places of the world, they won't even know who you are. And it's like, are you ready for that kind of stuff? Like, if I go to Bangladesh, I don't expect people to know, like, who I am. I'm just another tourist, or an American. And it's like, oh, there goes that American, Like, when I was in France for the Cannes Film Festival in 2023, I went in blank. Like, people didn't know who I was. I would introduce myself to the company that I run to and said, this is who I represent. At the time, I was with Warner Brothers as well. Well, I'm still connected to them, but I had an office job at Warner Brothers. And so they were like, oh, who do you work for? Oh, Warner Brothers. I was like, oh, shoot, And at the time, whatever was going on with the company was a big topic in France. And so you're like, well, what do I talk about? The company, myself, like, what is it? And so it's just trying to find that angle, you know. And eventually, once people saw the work, they're like, okay, you know, Walt is serious about what he's doing. This is an interesting film. It's like, according to them, it was a very American film. Because, you know, it's just, in Europe, I guess cinema is a little different. They all have their own, I guess, tastes, or for lack of a better term, just visuals, you know. And so when I was there with Norjack, which is now available on RiseFlix, you check it out. It was one of those where like, yo, like, they saw it in color. The film's in black and white, and so they're like, oh, this is in color, but you know, you're promoting it as a black and white film. Why this? And I said, well, at the time, because we were just so in such a rush to get it out there that we got it out there in color first. I said the film's in black and white, so you guys got a treat. And they're like, oh, thank you, you know, and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I understand why we all need it, especially now. I think this new generation, you know, people who grew up with, you know, a phone in hand or were born with a phone, I can see that you need that audience. You need that, you know, people are like, you know, oh, we're social. Like, social media wouldn't be anything without us, and the other way around, we wouldn't be anything out with social media, and that's the problem. That's why, not to get too political, but that's something they used against us too. So like, oh, we're gonna shut this down, and people were going mad, like, oh my god, I'm gonna lose my sponsors, I'm gonna lose so much money, you know. And it's like, because I don't have a real job, this is how I live. And it's like, oh shoot, you know. And then it was just a ploy, and then they got it back on, and people were like, oh my god, it's back, you know. Because people were like, I remember, because I work with a lot of young people, they're like, I'm gonna lock in, I'm gonna finally focus and do my life, you know, now that this company's gone. And then the next day it's back, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm back.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, okay, well, so much for that. I was like, cool. But when you're in, you lock in. You know, I was like, oh man. But yeah, you know, I can see why, and it's such a strong topic, you know. And I think, like, I'm not trying to offend anyone or say that I'm better than anyone. I think it's just, we all vibrate differently, you know. And it's, yeah, you know. But I'll give you guys the validation, you guys.
Thanks. I think I'm like on the opposite. Like, you're talking about like people needing praise, though. I'm like on the opposite side of that spectrum. I need people to tell me I'm not fucking up. Like, I just need strangers on the street, when you see me, just go, hey Bailey, you're not fucking up today, and I'll be like, thanks, buddy.
I think I can be silent. So it's like, hey, good job, Ryan. I'm like, thank you.
I mean, like that. I mean, yeah, that's something that I think is important for all of us, you know, because that's one of the, I remember when I first started working, like, you know, when they started doing training videos for jobs, and they're like, you know, how do you reach out to your coworkers? How do you reach out to each other, your bosses? And I was like, well, just be nice, you know, say something nice, like, but mean it. Don't just be like, oh, good job, and then keep walking. It's like, know their name. Even now, and where I'm at now with Universal, you know, you have people who say hi to you, and you have people who don't. And it's for whatever reason, you know, people who go out of their way to, like, hey, hello, my name is such and such, and I do this. Who are you? And you're like, oh, you know, and sometimes it catches you off guard because you're not ready for it, because you might be do something else. So for me, sometimes it's like, I'd like to talk to people, but at the same time, if I'm doing something, I'd rather not bother you. Or if I see you conducting a meeting, I'll be like, all right, they're busy. Instead of like, oh, hey, you know, it's more like, hey, you know. And so when they take the time to do that, I was like, oh, wow, you know, now I know someone, you know.
So your answer definitely gave off the vibe that you're in the entertainment. So
yeah.
basically, to kind of get it off more started, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit, just kind of an overview.
Sure.
Yeah.
My full name is Walter Perez, but I go by Walt Perez. That's my stage name. Because there's two other people who share the same name who are also in entertainment. One's a journalist, and the other is an actor. We're like only a few years apart. And so he's been in. He was one of the pilots in the Avengers, the first one, the Ethan one, and stuff. And so when I got into this business, we always kind of they would confuse us. One, because we're both Latino, so they were like, "Oh, you're not that Walter Perez. You're the other Walter Perez." And so, you know, I would get called into auditions, and I was like, "Oh no, you're not the guy," or vice versa. He will get called in, and I was like, "No, we're not talking to you. We were the other guy." And so we never met. like our agents met with each other. They're like, oh, you know, like I guess they fought for each other, but I never met him in life. Like I know who he is. I've seen him, but we never actually shook hands. Be like, oh, so that was when I was doing acting. Eventually, I went into more of behind the scenes, you know, grip work, PA work, obviously writing, directing, producing work, kind of thing. And so that's what I do mostly. I write, produce, and direct my own work. I started doing this, but where I really got into it more was after 2009, when I funded a production company. Because I didn't want to use my name. I felt that by using my name, it would have been a bit arrogant. So I was like, oh, you know, I don't feel like I'm Tom Cruise or anyone to just be like...
Wait, why can't you use your name?
I mean, you could, but like, I don't...
can.
You can. I just didn't feel that I was big enough to be like, oh, produced by this person. Like, who the hell is that?
And he would have accidentally started a war
Yeah.
with the other
guy.
Walter Perez.
Oh, so I shouldn't ever use my middle name. Like, oh, this is by Shaquille.
I think we should start a war with Shaq, but that's a side
I
talk.
don't know, man. Shaq is pretty big.
We can get into that later.
Have you seen Shaq?
I've seen poster boards of him, and I'm not sure if I should actually be like, oh shit,
I
he's
think
taller
if
than me.
I got on Ryan's shoulders and we put on a trench coat, we could almost be as tall as Shaq. Almost.
Yeah. So because, like, for example, you see like Steven Spielberg. He would say Steven Spielberg presents, you know, Gremlins or Poltergeist, you know, all the stuff he was doing with his name alone, and then he started doing it through Emblem. You know, it became Emblem presents such and such. So it wasn't just him anymore. It was him, Frank Marshall, and Kathleen Kennedy, who now ran that whole division. And so, and I mean, they're still there at Universal on the lower lot. If you're ever lucky to be around, you can see their offices. They're very nice and stuff. They're very secured. So if you can be walking up and then I forget his name, but it's a security guard. He's always there. He'll be like, "You need something?" You're like, "Oh, no, I'm just walking." You know?
Yeah.
You know, but it's one of those where it's like, oh shoot, because it's such a big lot. You know, you imagine the theme park. That's 2 floors, and now they're building a whole roller coaster around it, which I'm sure some people are excited about it. I'm not. But
I feel like if I worked there, I wouldn't be excited about it. I mean, it might be cool for a day, but I feel like if I'm actually trying to get shit done, I don't want to hear every like 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, if this, like, what is it by, because there's 2-3 stages by where Nintendo World is at. There's a whole gate that divides them, so when you're inside the stages, you don't really hear anything anymore. Because when you're in the theme park, you hear everything.
Yeah.
You hear all the themes blowing out your ear. But once you're inside the stages, you don't hear anything. Mm-hmm. So it's they did it right. You know, they're soundproof and stuff. So I was like, cool.
I guess I was thinking more The Office. Like,
The
Office, they'd be able to hear it, right?
Not really. I mean, because like we've been in some of their offices, and like they're still pretty soundproof until you step out on their garden patio, and then you're like, oh shit, there's a theme park right over there.
I guess I was imagining when you said that. The roller coaster going through the office too, like around it, and then the final drop, you just like come in the upper window of like Steven Spielberg's office, and then you go out the lobby.
I think this roller coaster is being built by where the Starlight stairways go, and so when you're going down, you can see it. So I guess you'll see people kind of going, which is kind of scary because, you know, if anyone falls off or if a wallet falls off, they'll just hit that glass. You know, you're like, oh shoot. But yeah, I mean, I started since I was a kid. I wanted to be. I guess that's where we talked about validation. So when I was a kid, I was sort of an attention seeker. You know, I remember I wanted people to notice me. You know, because from momentarily I was a lonely child. You know, that my parents had just separated, and so it was just mom and I for the longest time. And so, you know, mom was always very caring. You know, very like, oh, you know, Walt wants to be an actor. He told me. I was only 3 years old. I was like, I want to be on TV. And she was like, yeah, you know, so she would almost like, yeah, just let him have his fun, you know, let him play his instruments. Because, I would be obnoxiously loud. People would be talking, I'd be like, you know, doing something just to be like, man, what's up with that kid? And stuff. And just to get their attention and eventually talk to them. You know, because I know a simple hello would have done. But me, I was like, no, hey. And so I eventually, as I got older, that sort of changed. You know, once my sisters came along, I was like, okay, you know, it's not about me anymore. It's about them. It's about the family. It's about you know, people around me, my friends, you know, and so, but I always made it a point to stand out, one way or the other, whether it was a haircut, the way I spoke, something I read, a movie I watched, a TV show I was watching. Because, you know, in the 90s, you know, you have Family Matters, Fresh Prince, Friends, Living Single. You know, you had all these shows that were popular with adults and stuff. And, like, I grew up pretty fast. Eventually, like, once I hit my teens, my preteens, teens, when we had cable, I grew up with HBO. So, you know, The Wire, Sex and the City, The Sopranos, you know, Carnival, all those shows, like, it just, I shouldn't have been watching them, but I was watching them. You know, and so that kind of paved the way into sort of the kind of things I wanted to do. You know, when Dad was in the frame too, he would say like, oh, you know, he loved politics, so he'd always be like, oh, this country's going to hell, you know, kind of thing. And I was like, granted, you know, and so, or even learning about politics around the world, like, you know, he would always tell me, you know, Walt, you know, you have to have something to talk about, no matter where you're at, have something to talk about. If someone's talking gibberish, talks about something better, say something better, make it a conversation, so you can either isolate that person or get everyone else to pay attention to you. Do that, and you know, you'll start to see the power behind that. And I said, okay, cool. And so, you know, I would push that angle a lot. And then where we disagreed was that I wanted to be a creative. You know, I said, yeah, when I finally told my dad, I was like, hey, I think I like this acting stuff, but I also want to get more into like making movies and stuff. And it was like, have you guys seen Orange County? It's like a movie that came out like maybe 20 years ago with Jack Black. Mm-mm. Yeah, so in that movie he wants to be a writer. So he's like, a writer? His dad is John Lithgow. He's like, a writer? What are you gonna write about? He's like, you're not. He mentions a few things, and then he's like, name me 5 writers. He's like, Shakespeare, Stephen King, and Rice. Like 3 in the history of literature. And so the same thing. He was like, name me 5 successful filmmakers, and I mentioned, you know, and he's like, yeah, none of them are like you. Like, you know, you're gonna struggle. He told me, he said, you're gonna struggle a lot when you get into this, because very few people like us, son, are in this business. And I said, but there's people like us in this business, because it's not just Hollywood. You know, there's entertainment in Mexico, there's entertainment in Central South America, there's entertainment in Spain, there's entertainment all around the world, I said. So I can just go by that, you know. And I didn't think of it at the time, you know, I didn't think about diversity. These are things that didn't bother me at the time. Mm-hmm. As I got older, you know, especially, I think it hit me the first time when I was applying to college. I was senior in high school, doing my FAFSA. Roosevelt High School had a good program where they would teach you how to apply for FAFSA. They would help you with the applications. The program was really, really good. I don't know if it's still there. It's been such a long time since I've been associated with that school. Mm-hmm. So I remember I was there, and I remember all these questions that would ask me, like, you know, gender, background, you know, parents' background. And I was like, why is this so important? You know, like, why is this so important? And then they were like, oh, it's just because, you know, there's this program that goes, and, you know, they gave me the whole spiel. And I was like, okay. And then when I started working, same thing. It's like, what are you? You know, and I remember there's this question, I think it still stands now, when they ask you, particularly for us, they're like, are you Latino or Hispanic? You know, you're like, why is this so important? They ask you that twice in all applications. It's like, why is that so important? And, you know, and I have my answers. Some people tell me, well, that's because, you know, same thing. It's about inclusion. It's about, you know, this, and that. They want to keep a marginalized number of people. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. But I was like, cool. So sometimes I'll state to decline, or, you know, or vice versa. Or there's a joke I have where one of my friends, he's a chef now. And he would say, yeah, put that you're white. See if you get it. And so, like, I imagine I show up to the interview. I was like, like, you're not white? I was like, yeah. No shit, you know. Can we curse in this part?
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
But yeah, you know, like, it's these little things that I just, as I started going up in the ladder and just through jobs, I remember I had my first job was at the California Science Center over there by, like, downtown LA by USC. I found it to be so ironic for me because I wanted to go to USC. That was my dream school. Like, I made a mistake when I was in high school. I only applied to, I think, 3 universities. all of them because they have film programs, and they all turned me down, especially USC. And so I remember when I was at the California Science Center, I would walk around and I would see the campus, and I was like, damn, you know, I'm still so far away from it, because now I'm still working here, making minimum wage, and just seeing all those kids over there. And I remember when they would come in for the football games, the Coliseum, and you know, I would see all the red and gold, and I was like, damn, you know, it stunk for like a while. Yeah. You know, but then eventually I got over it, and what helped getting over it, while I was there, I started attending seminars at USC, and I met a friend. I consider him my friend and a colleague. His name is Alessandro Ago. He pretty much runs the film department, in so many words. And so through him, through his support, and then I started going to school at LACC. That was my first film school. Started taking classes there to really see if I can do this. Because I could say I can do this, but can I really do this? Am I good at it? I guess I needed that validation. I needed that, like, I needed a professor to be like, yeah, you got it, kid, you know, or no, you don't, but you can get it better, you know, because you see all kinds of, when you see student films, you see all kinds of stuff, and I think now that, this is before YouTube, but now thanks to YouTube and all these like streaming services, they're afraid you get to see now all these films that no one saw, you know, you get to see Nolan's first student films, Steven's first student films, you know, all these up and coming filmmakers on their first student films, you get to see them now for free. And it's like, wow, you know, like they had no money and they still did that. Or they just used whatever resources they had. And that's inspirational, because it gets you like, okay, I can do this. I can start doing this more and more. And so that was kind of me. Like, I was very gung-ho about stuff. People would say no, companies would say no, but I just kept doing it. I kept doing it. I just pushed myself. And rejection became very second nature. I almost expected it. Like, I remember I was like, I'm not gonna get this. They're like, you didn't get it. I was like, all right, whatever. I'm still gonna do the next project. Like, how much money do we have? Well, we have this much. Okay, can we hire these actors? Sure. Okay, let's do it. Let's just do it and put it out there. And so I started making my name in festivals. Festivals started happening, and that's where it really started. People were like, oh shit, like, you know, Walt is very serious. Like, I remember my godfather, and you know, someone who was very special to me, he was very supportive. You know, every time I have a screening, I think about him. You know, he's no longer with me, but I think about him, and he's like, I would always say, you know, I'm going to shout your name when I see you up there, when I see your name up there. And so I always think about him when I do this stuff. And so I remember when we got big, where we're like, okay, you know what? I was working at Cal State LA, and I had met a bunch of students, and they're all like, you know, we want to make film, we want to turn this around because we want to compete with USC and UCLA. We want to get these academy qualified programs to the campus. And I said, well, why is the academy ignoring you guys? Like, why don't you guys have resources? Like, you guys pay tuition, don't you? No, yeah. What's going on with that money? Why don't you have better cameras? Like, what's going on? And so it became sort of a mission for me to get that program going, to get those resources going to them, especially because Cal State Los Angeles, I feel, is a gap for everyone. Like, everyone goes there, every background. You don't have to be rich to get in. You don't have to be, I guess, a stellar student to get in. I'm not against stellar students. If you're an A+ student, good for you. Keep at it, please.
If you're an A+ student, fuck you. That's what it's saying.
And so, like, you know, even with what's the one on the hill? Oh, Loyola Marymount. I also work with them too, and they have a great film program and stuff. I think I know someone from there actually. And so going back to Cal State LA, we started working with them, and so and we shot a series and we screened it. I remember they had built a whole new student center with a nice theater, which is pretty cool. And so after that, I told myself, well, okay, well, I don't want to continue making student projects or working on student films, I said, because I don't have because it's their projects, so I really couldn't push them and say, hey, put it in a festival, or hey, put it in something, if they didn't want to. They're like, oh no, I'm just doing this for fun, you know, which is fine. If you're having fun, great. But I wanted more. You know, I wanted more. I was like, you know, where's the line at? There is no line. I want more. And so I said, okay. I was remember talking to one of my girlfriends at the time, and I was like, you know, I want to do something big, like something that's just gonna blow people away. And they're like, well, like, what would you think? Like a horror movie? Horror is always very accessible, something scary that people could watch. And I said, you know, I've never done a horror movie before. We used to do comedies and stuff, and so I said, okay. And I guess my phone was listening to our conversation. So when I was going through something, this ad popped up. It's like, oh, you know, Stephen King's, you know, Dollar Babies, you know, like an old ad, you know, like a vintage ad.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit. And then I clicked and it hit me because in high school, that's when I read all of Stephen King's books. Like they were all in my library, the school library, so I would pick them up, read them, and I would see the ads in the back. And the Dollar Babies, so they no longer exist, but the Dollar Babies, Stephen King began this program in the late 70s. He would say, okay, you know, student filmmakers, I have a list of short stories that you can adapt based on my work. Oh. And so all you gotta do is pay me $1 and I'll give you permission to do this project. Wow. You have a year to do it and you have to finance it yourself. There was a lot of other stipulations that came in because, you know, students started getting a little crazy and abusing their power by saying, oh, Stephen King's this, and they're like, oh, you can't use my name, you know, so you can just say it's based on my work, but don't put my name on the poster, you know, because then you owe me something.
That's misleading.
Yeah, it's misleading because it could be, what if the movie isn't good?
Exactly.
Yeah, you know. There's one, if you can watch it on YouTube, it's called The Lawnmower Man. If you can find it on YouTube, it's really good. And so it was shot in the 70s, and there is the reason why, and so I was reading this and I was like, oh, cool. And I said, well, has anyone actually done a good one that has stood out in front of and then I was looking to the history of it. Then I saw that Frank Depernow, I think that's his name, the guy who directed Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he directed one called The Woman in the Room. And Steven, he fell in love with that short film. So much so that Frank was able to acquire the rights to the Shawshank Redemption, the short story, and develop it into the film that eventually became in the late 90s. And so, but, you know, you imagine, Frank, you know, his eye, as a filmmaker, as a writer, because Stephen King books are hard to adapt because there's so much that goes into them. And so I said, oh, wow. And so I remember my producing partners at the time, because at that time, Verloren Productions was just me. And so these other 4 people came up to me and they're like, if you're going to do this, we'll put on the money. But do you feel confident? Can you do this? And what story are you going to do? And I said, okay, well, I have 2 options. There's one that I really wanted to do that I couldn't do because someone else beat me on the rights. Oh. Yeah, so he actually completely bought the rights. And he paid more than $1 for them. Damn. And I was like, damn. But that one would have been great. I'm still trying to see if I can still acquire it. I'm working on that now as we speak. But eventually I looked at the list again and I said, what's this one? And it was One for the Road. And I was like, what's this about? And so I read it, and it was a sequel to Salem's Lot. And I said, okay. And then I saw that there was 3. There's the prequel, Jerusalem's Lot, the book, Salem's Lot, and One for the Road, which is the last story. So I said, okay. It was about, I want to say, 50 or more pages, but it was still a short story. And so I adapted it into about a 45-page script. And so I said, okay, let's get down to brass tacks. What do we need? We're not in Maine, and I'm not going to go shoot in Maine because I don't have that kind of money. We'll shoot it in California. And they're like, well, yeah, Walter, but it doesn't snow here. I was like, okay, granted. And I remember that year that we filmed, we had a really bad winter. So it snowed for a hot second, and then the heat wave came in February and just melted everything away. And so we're like, oh shoot, we're gonna have to get creative because I remember we shot some stuff in the snow. And I said, okay, well, we're gonna have to get creative about this. And I said, well, what if we use a soundstage and just redesign some of the shots. And you know, we got creative about different things, different elements, because we were dealing with the supernatural. And so, like I said, this is the point. This is the test where we have to be creative and not lose the film, because if not, then this is never going to get released. And so we're like, okay. And so, long story short, we got it done. I remember when I saw the first edit of it, and I was like, wow, like it was 30 minutes long, and I was like, wow, like they're like, you don't want to cut any more of this? And I was like, nah. It is what it is. If I said if festivals like it, you know, great. If they don't, much I can do about that. So I said, okay. Because, you know, everyone's like, oh, it's 20 minutes. It has to be 20 minutes. I was like, no, well, I'll talk to them about it. And that's like, let me do the talking and let the film talk for itself too, you know. I think when people hear Stephen King, they're going to want to open the door, you know, and they're going to make exceptions. And they're like, okay. And so that was the plan. And I remember we screened it. The first screening, what happened at UCLA, so a professor of mine who works at UCLA now, he was at LACC, and I remember he was one of my first persons to tell me, hey, Walt, you know, you got a good eye, you know what you're doing, keep at it, you know. Professor Jonathan Coombs, he really pushed me on that. And I remember we were shooting a mini DV at the time, like these little tapes and stuff, before we went into film and then eventually all digital. And so somehow he heard about the movie, and he told the staff at UCLA, and then they called me. I remember Ben Seifert called me, and he was like, hey, we hear that you have this Stephen King project. Is it finished? And I remember we were in the last round of post-production, and I was like, yeah, it's done. And they're like, oh, okay, then we would like to screen it next month, April, maybe like April 4th, maybe.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, cool. And then after that, we finished the call, and I called my editor, Alex, and I was like, Alex, I need you to finish this right now. This needs to be done today. Like, you know, all the sound, all the effects need to be done today, because we just got a call from UCLA and they want to see the movie. And he's like, wow. Oh shit. He's like, okay. You know, I felt bad because we were working overtime, but what came out, I remember we had different cuts of it. So UCLA got that really like interesting cut, but they didn't know. And we were like, oh yeah, this is the final cut. You know, you guys are the first people to see it. And so everyone was like, oh shit, like, you know, we're so excited, you know. Everyone felt so like, oh wow, you know, like we're the first to see it. So I think that kind of played off in our favor. Because once the film finished, they were like, once it was done, like we did a whole Q&A, we talked about it. But what did it for me was when people stayed behind and actually walked up to shake my hand. That's what really did it for me. I was like, oh wow, like they're impressed. They like what they saw. I made an impact. Okay, so and yeah, I remember I met a lot of people that I still work with now. You know, who were like, wow, you know, how did you do it? You know, what did you say in the Q&A? You can tell me, like, personally. Like, and I was like, you know, and so we went into that and stuff. And that eventually from there, we screened it with USC, which was another dream come true for me, because it was finally like, I was never a student in these campuses, but when they reached out to me and they're like, hey, we want to show your film here, you know, use the facility if you need more post-production. I was like, wow. Like, you know, I felt like a student. It felt like a dream. I was like, wow. You know, so I got a lot of that out of my system, you know, and I feel very lucky that happened. But at the same time, I had to make that happen. You know, it was like, I didn't wait around for it to be like, hey, you know, it's more like they closed the door, but I like broke it down, basically. It's like, no, you know, like that's like, I'm not going to take no for an answer, basically. Yeah. You know, in regards to that. I take no for other things, but not that.
I was gonna ask. So the first person that heard about it, and then UCLA reached out to you. You don't know how they ended up hearing about it, or was it someone like a connection of a connection that heard about it?
I think so. Like, I think through social media, because we were talking about it. But you know, I wasn't popular, or I wasn't verified at the time. It was more like, we're just making a movie. We're making this movie, and we're trying to, You know, we were trying to get funds. We were trying to do a lot of things with it. You know, I had a whole plan. But to get to that point, I needed all this before we can actually plan A to B. Like, we were talking to AMC. We were talking to... This is before the pandemic, too, by the way. Yeah. So there was a lot more going on that went away after the pandemic.
Dang.
And so we were, like, talking, you know, we're like, hey, we need this. Even Warner Bros. Was like, if you want to screen it, you know, we can open one of the theaters up. And I remember I was like, yeah, I want that Jack Warner theater. But then when we did screen it at Warner Brothers, I remember when I was there, we were talking about it, and then they're like, I don't think Jack's theater was gonna be big enough for it. They told me, you need something a little bigger. And I said, the SJR, and they're like, not that big, you know, maybe screening room 12. And I was like, how many? And like about 200, I think. You know, we've had meetings there before when we were all working at one time or the other. And I was like, okay. So I remember I went into that screening room. I met the projectionist, and he's like, because I'm very detailed, so I like to work from the ground up. So, because I was a projectionist once, I worked at a movie theater, so I sat with the projectionist. We did test runs, we did audio runs. We're like, okay, you know, because Warner Brothers got to see the final cut. You know, UCLA and USC were like the mid cuts. Once you got to the Warner Brothers screen, that was the final cut. All the effects were in, all the sound was on, the music was on, everything was where it needed to be. So we were 100% ready to go.
You're gonna make all the people who were in those screenings jealous now. If you were in those screenings, he's joking. He's joking.
You made it. You saw the right one. And so I remember I was with the projectionist, and we were. Because it was Jim, it was, I forget their names, they're much older now. One of them is the father of a former tour guide. Her name's Savannah. Her dad worked there at the time. I don't know if he's still there. But, you know, you make friends with these people. Because you're like, they're the tech guys. They're like, okay, what do you need? You know, you got a Blu-ray? What do you got, a DCP? What is it? You know, and you're like, oh, I got this. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so I remember we were doing all these tests. And then when we were in screening room 12, they're like, when we were projecting it, I was like, okay, is it 16:9? Is it 185? How do we fix the matting for you? You know, so I was like, okay, no, it's super widescreen. So because that one was like 16:9, so they really put in the letterbox. And so I was like, cool. And I said lights. And then I remember I was messing around with the audio knob, because they would tell me, hey, you know, how's it looking down there? And I was like, looks good, picture's on, you know. Can I raise the volume on it? And it's like, sure. And so I remember it was at 7, I put it up to 9, so people could really feel the immersion, you know, like the sound, like really, it was very, I call it the Nolan effect, you know, just to like blow you away with the sound. You're like, oh, what the hell? You know, it's kind of loud. And yeah, I mean, we had, the reason the screening happened was because at the time, there was an organization called Unidos at WB, which I think became Vibras now. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. I just feel that that's what happened. Because it was an organization developed for Latinx creators, you know, people who worked there who were of the same cultural background. And so we all had this space where we sit down and talk about what we wanted to do, whether it was growing in the corporation or maybe doing some work with the studio. So that's what they serviced. And I think Vibras is where it's at now, because they're the ones who screened Blue Beetle when Blue Beetle came out. They were the ones behind it. And so there's different organizations that cater to those aspects. And so Unidos was the one that really helped me set up the event. We did 2 screenings. We did an early one and an evening one, so that was the encore. And, you know, people really, they were impressed. They liked it. I remember one person that went to all those screenings was Soren Odom. You guys know Soren. Yeah. So he's my producing partner. He's also the DP that I work with. And so he was there, like, as soon as we met. I remember we met at Warner, and so I told him, hey, I got this screening in. And he was looking for someone to work with. You know, he was like, okay, I need someone who's as serious as I am. And I was like, well, don't take my word for it. I said, I have this movie. Go check it out at UCLA. And I remember he went to that one. He went to the one at SC. He went to all of them, and then he was there for the Warner one. And so I said, okay, you know, we became good friends. And so I just kind of picking his brain. I was like, what is it that you want to do? Like, what do you? He said, well, I want to do music, man. Like, because he's a great composer. He's like, I do music. I want to do this. I've shot some films, and I remember I had this. We were just about 2019, so I was already planning the whole festival run for Into the Night, which is what the project is called, the Stephen King one. And so I had this other one that was in the back burner, and it was getting ready. I said, okay, we did a Stephen King project. I want to do something bigger now. And I said, I need a DP. Would you be willing to be the DP? And he's like, well, I haven't shot anything in a long time. I said, well, I'm going to take a chance on you. We're going to do digital and film. So we're going to do crazy stuff. I said, because now we could get away with anything now. And he said, okay. And so that was Norjack. That was the one about the DB Cooper incident. Mm-hmm. And so while we released, obviously the pandemic happened, things shut down. While we had Into the Night go through different festival circuits and digital platforms, in order to get Academy consideration, we were shooting Norjack. So I remember it was one of the most tedious shoots because we were all scared. We didn't know, we didn't understand what was going on. And so we were being cautious, masks. I had a thermometer, I'd check people's temperatures every time we were on set, and we just wanted to work because everything stopped, and nobody was coming around, and, a lot of us were getting, we felt alone, we were getting depressed. And so I said, guys, like, let's shoot something, if something happens, blame it on me, kind of thing. And I remember that same year we saw Tenet, in whatever theater was open. I remember we went to go see it in IMAX, and we were just trying to make the most of what was going on, and stuff. And eventually, Into the Night became an Academy considered film.
It's amazing.
I remember we had, because I've been attending for a while now, so I remember we had that ceremony at Union Station. There was, when you walk into Union Station, there's a whole, if you walk through the main gate on your left hand side, there's a whole section that used to be what I want to consider to be bank tellers. And
it looks like it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. That beautiful room that you walk into.
They shot Blade Runner there. That was the police station where he walks in.
I didn't know that.
That was, and the scene where, I guess, Pearl Harbor, where Ben says bye to Josh Hartnett's character before he leaves to England. That's also Union Station. So they set up this like amphitheater, and it was just very small, like no more than 40 guests, just films that were nominated and stuff. And it was just nice to be invited to be like, hey, your film made the cut. You didn't get nominated, but you made the cut. So that began my relationship with the Academy.
Yeah, that's got to be surreal.
Yeah, dude. And so you're like, oh. And since then, I've been able to attend either the parties, attend the main ceremony. I've been able to take friends to them, and so it's just, since one thing I told myself too, it's the creation of relationships, relationships with the schools. Like I remember something that I usually tell people in private, but I guess I can share it now that I'm over it. When I got rejected from the colleges that I wanted to go to, I felt very like angry at them. I felt like this kind of just I wasn't over it. I was kind of like, man, the hell with them. And I remember when they started reaching out to me, I felt funny. I was kind of like, oh, now they want to talk to me. You all these things, these voices start coming up to you like, oh, now they want a piece of you, Perez. What happened when you needed them? And you feel like, it reminds me of one of my top 10 favorite films, Rocky. It ranks in number 6, I think, in my list. But there's a scene where, Rocky gets the shot. They're like, oh, you're going to fight Apollo Creed, for the world, heavyweight champion of the world, And everyone's like, yeah, Rocky Balboa. And, he's kind of like, he's not used to his attention, right? He's like, oh, and everyone's making fun of him. But he's trying to play it off like, oh, it's okay, even though people are like, haha, he's like, he's Italian. Well, if he can't fight, at least he could cook, And everyone's like making fun of him. And he's like, nah, and don't bother me none, And finally, when Mickey goes up to him, he's like, hey, let me train you because I want to pass my knowledge to you. If not, they're going to take advantage of you. And he's like, oh, now you want to talk to me? You know, what happened when I went up to you and you told me no, you know, now you want to talk to me? You know, it's that anger. And so I remember my sister, Kim, he's a teacher, someone that I admire greatly. She told me, she's like, you know, you shouldn't think that way. You know, you should really, I know that you feel that way, but you should open up. You know, she said, you didn't say no. I'm like, no, I said yes. But I'm just telling you how I feel, you know?
Yeah.
And stuff like, I could pretend, I could smile and be like, hey, yeah. But deep down, I felt like there was still something there, you know?
For sure.
In the kitchen, you know, kind of like, you know, like, hey. And so they're like, she told me, no, you know, just get over it. You know, so many other words. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I have to get over it, you know? Because so much time has gone by, I said, you know, I'm no longer in school. I'm now doing it. And so this is a different kind of opportunity. Mm-hmm. So it's a different kind of... And so I remember I read about Stephen, which I'm surprised I never did before. And I saw that Stephen got rejected from those schools. Mm-hmm. I saw that a lot of these filmmakers, actors, people that I admire, you know, kind of... Same thing. They went through it a different way, and I said, okay, you know, if they could do it, then maybe this will be my destiny. I'll just have to do it this way. Do I recommend it? No. If you can go to school, film school is important. I think it's important because you get to have free access to tools. You get to meet the people that you're going to work with for the first time. You know.
Yeah.
You're going to meet your first crew members. As you evolve, or they evolve, or if one of you gets another shot or an opportunity, you're going to meet different people. But, you know, just always stay open to those ideas. Because if you close yourself because of X, Y, Z reasons, no one's going to come knocking. You have to, no matter how you feel, like, trust me, I know you feel that constant, like, you know, anger. And especially now, there's so much going on. I can see why a lot of us are a certain way or maybe feel angry. But you still have to kind of be open to those opportunities because you never know. You know, whether... I remember I was doing background work when I started acting. And then at the time, before this whole inclusion and diversity thing became very popular, or in, as they said, they would tell me, oh, Walt, like, what are you? What do you mean? Human? No, what's your background? I'm like, the wall? They're like, no, like, what's your cultural background? I was like, yeah, I'm this. And they're like, well, I don't know, and I can't tell, so we're going to label you this way. And being labeled that way got me a lot of work.
Oh.
But I felt that I was betraying the cause, you know, because eventually the cause that I was fighting was going to become a whole big thing that now is like the battle, you know, because we're still fighting for that space, that, you know, that office space to be like, oh, I want to be in the room where it happens, you know, and stuff like, and we've had, you know, different pushes. And I said, you know, for example, like a few years ago, a movie like In the Heights wouldn't be able to come out nowadays or something, you know, or it'd be very kind of like My Family or American Me or Stand and Deliver. You know, these movies that come, they're like unicorns. They come once in a while, you know. But there's so much talent that brings that together. And if we just had the same ability to do as other big releases, and if people still cater to them as we do, for example, this is where in other cultures they have it better adjusted. Where other, like for example, Tyler Perry, his thing, the way he does things, is so like it's genius because he knows there's an audience for it out there and people watch it, you know, and it's like good or bad or however the critics feel about it, someone paid a ticket for it and he's getting something for it, you know, and that's like cool. That's a good attitude to have about it, you know, and not everything works. Sometimes some movies are not, you know, good or bad or whatever, but it's out there and someone saw it and someone had a good time watching it, and that's the point, you know, you just keep at it and stuff. And so, but yeah, I mean, that sort of changed my attitude on a lot of things in regards to how I felt about, you know, validation, rejection, finding myself, you know, like where do I fit in all this? Like, who am I? You know, and who are the people who are going to work with me? because everyone says, oh yeah, well, I want to work with you, I want to work with you, I want to, but I learned a very hard lesson in 2024. Some people just want to have their name on the poster, but they don't want to do anything.
Damn.
And so it's one of those where you really have to be careful who you circle yourself with, because everybody wants to do it. Everyone's like, yeah, I'll do it, and but not everybody really wants to do it. This is hard work. You know this. Like, you guys have worked in studios. We've all seen what happens. When you're inside, you're inside. When you're outside, you're outside. But we know what it's like. We see the struggle, so we know firsthand that this is not easy work. And it's to tell someone else, you're preaching to the choir. But when you see someone that doesn't want to do the work, who's just like, no, just give me that chance, like put my name on there, or something, or they try to, toy with you in other ways, you're like, wow, I'm being used, and you're like, oh shoot, and that's when you have to really step on the brake and be like, okay, you know what, get off the train, because this train's gonna keep moving, but you need to get off of it, and that goes for anybody. And friends, colleagues, even family members, sometimes you need to say bye momentarily and then keep moving to find yourself. And then eventually people catch on and be like, oh man, that person was really serious about what they wanted to do. And then eventually I always believe that people come around. They come around, and because life is different for everybody. And so when people come back around, they realize, hey, you know what, I made a mistake, I want to apologize to you. And you have to be ready for that too. You can't be like, no, it can't be like Oppenheimer, where it was like, we're not gonna shake hands. It's more like, how's it going, how are you, unless you want to be like Miss Oppenheimer, then by all means, but I try to be as polite as possible and say, okay, I understand that some people have different ambitions and sometimes don't align with what I want to do. But yeah.
Walter's laying down the law, y'all. Hell yeah.
So basically, you said you kind of got a more restart because someone kind of randomly saw your video, then they got you into the film festivals, which kind of like elevated everything. How do you feel? What would you say is a good way of actually getting? So like you kind of also mentioned like the validation from one of your teachers, just like, hey, that's a good one, kid. Yeah. Like that's what I always tell people is I'm waiting for someone to be like, all right, kid, you got this stuff. I want to take you with me. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel like is the best way to get either discovered or getting your work actually done, just by submitting it or finding an agent or something like that? Because I know. I think I was also talking to Bailey about this.
It's very complicated, yeah.
Most people don't want you. So, like, most people that have an agent won't let you know about their agent because now their agent's going to get them less work because they're trying to get you work. But then I also feel finding an agent online sometimes seems sketchy.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't want to just text some random girl. Like, oh, yeah, cool. We have your information. Just send over all your work. And then now all your work is
there, yeah.
Is theirs. So, like, what would you say is one of the good ways of actually getting more work, getting discovered, getting that shot?
I mean, I remember I met Jerry Lewis once before his passing. It was at the Samuel Goldwyn Theater, and he was very old at that time and very like nonchalant. He would say like the darndest things. And I remember somebody went up to him and asked him the same question. And I think Jerry got kind of like what? And Jerry said it this, I don't agree with his answer, but he said this. He's like, in regards to actors, he's like, you either got it or you don't. But there's no magic key that's gonna tell you, hey, this is the road to success. He's like, I did it my way, you gotta do it yours. And so I was like, okay. Basically, there is no right answer, but there is a way to do it. So for me, it was about the work. I think the work spoke for itself. And attending those events where everyone's like, whether it's a festival, a party, and you almost, even if you have to pay your way in, like if you have to buy a ticket, I recommend buying it because you never know. You might meet someone who's like, okay, like, and even when they ask you, so what do you do? Have an answer. Because if they're like, what do you do? And you're like, you know, you don't have one, then they're not going to take you seriously. Be a go-getter. Like, really, almost, it's like you're basically your own business card. Like, you're selling yourself. Like, you know, you're like, hey, I do this. I write, produce, and direct. What have you written? Well, I just wrote this about this movie, and it went to this festival, or I got into the Nichols Fellowship, or I got into the Academy, or I got into, you know, the AI5 Film Festival. Whatever it is, those are merits. And if you haven't gotten there yet, then do that first before you go to that party. You know, because if you go into that party empty-handed, you're gonna leave empty-handed. You know, you have to sort of build your foundation before you jump on the other end, because if not, your foundation will crumble. You know, it has to be a strong foundation.
Woo woo! All right, y'all, that was part 1, and we should have part 2 of the interview coming soon. In the meantime, follow Walt on Instagram at Walter P. Perez, and follow Verloren Productions on Instagram at Verloren Production with no S. That's VERLOREN Production with no S. You can also follow Verloren Productions and find all their content on YouTube as well. See ya!